Okay, it's 15:01, so I'm going to get going because an hour goes past very quickly at these sessions. Welcome everyone to our first EconTEAching seminar of 22-23. We must be into our third year of these now, fourth year, who knows. But we're very excited to be kicking off the session talking about how mobile careers in teaching track, teaching focused jobs, however you want to put it, or education focused roles in economics are, or general education focused roles. And the reason why I'm saying however you want to put it is sort of part of the issue that things are called different things in different institutions and in different countries, which makes the idea of looking for a job somewhere else a bit more complicated. For those who don't know me, and before I do that bit, this is being recorded. You should have had a message about that, and live streamed to YouTube. And we will use the chat. So if you have any questions for the panel, if you put it in the chat, then Ramin will crowdsource the main themes coming up and let me know, and I will put questions to the panel. And we will also get comments in from YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, you can put comments in there, in the chat there, and we will pick them up. So for those who don't know me, I'm Cloda Jenkins. I'm a professorial teaching fellow in economics and public policy at Imperial College Business School. I have recently moved jobs. So I've gone a whole sort of mile down the road from UCL to Imperial, but gone to a business school, which has had very different experience to working in an economics department. And one of the reasons why we decided to host this event at this point in time is I'm a member of the EEA Education Committee and the Royal Economic Society Education and Training Committee. And this discussion about, hang on, there's a clear job market in research posts. We have one in America, we have one in Europe, but it's less clear how it works for more education focused roles. Some institutions advertise both in the job market, some don't. And also the timings can be very different through the year. And also what institutions are requiring varies a lot. So we thought it'd be useful to find 3 willing volunteers from 3 different institutions and countries who've either moved roles within an institution or moved across institutions or a bit of both. So what we're going to do is, I'm not going to introduce the panelists because my first question is to get them to introduce themselves. But at some point through the discussion, there is a Mentimeter running, which is really just to crowdsource ideas from you guys about how you would go looking for a job in the education track, and whether you think your CV, your resume, is attractive to other institutions, or whether you've sort of adjusted it to meet what your institution's requiring. So you can work on that at any point through the session. And in the meantime, I'm going to, first of all, ask Juliette to introduce herself and briefly explain her career journey, including why she's got more of a teaching or education focus in her role.
Good, thank you, Cloda. Hi, everyone. My name is Juliette de Wit. I'm currently in an academic education tenure track, which is a bit of a novel role to me. I started this September. And before that, I was a PhD student. I defended my PhD last year at the University of Groningen. And that's also where I'm currently working at the Faculty of Economics and Business Economics. And working in this new role in the academic education tenure track.
Brilliant, thank you. And Melanie, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Melanie Fox. I am currently at Purdue University in a clinical assistant professor role. I'm also the director of our Center for Economic Education. I've had a kind of complex career path. I started in a more traditional academic role, albeit in a small liberal arts college, which in the US is very different from, say, a tenure track position here. at a large business school. I was there for 10 years, and then to be closer to family, I actually found there was more flexibility in finding positions in more teaching-oriented roles. And so I've been in a teaching-oriented role since 2014, with a small break to work in educational technology. And I've just recently started my role here. I came here just about a couple of months ago from Virginia Tech.
Excellent, thank you. And Miguel.
Hola, hi everyone, good to be here. So my name is Miguel Flores. I'm currently an assistant professor in economics at the School of Business in the National College of Ireland. And I am also, in charge of the work placement. This is a kind of a new role here, but I had a kind of a similar role before at the University of Saga in the School of Economics. And previously I worked at the Center for Competition Policy in the University of East Anglia. So I have moved from different roles and now to a different country. That's it for the moment.
Thank you, all of you. So hopefully, as an audience, you're hearing we have a wide range of experiences across only 3 people, and there are many people who've moved around like this. So Melanie, can you maybe kick us off by explaining, how you explain your job to another economist or another person, and how you distinguish it from maybe what might be considered a standard academic economist?
The way I distinguish my job to other economists is that I am a teaching specialist, that the bulk of my energy and focus and research is on developing effective teaching techniques for the classroom and delivering those techniques and training future classroom educators to also be excellent teachers. So I emphasize that, in a way that they can understand that, economics is about specialization and trade, and that I do what my comparative advantage is in, which is teaching. So I also emphasize that that doesn't mean I don't do any research. It just means that the bulk of my energies are focused on the classroom.
Excellent, very nice. I think we should all record that and write it down. Miguel, how about you?
Yeah, I think, well, my role is slightly different in the sense that I have, as a part of my role as a kind of the director for the work placement program, it's like a more management role in addition to, teaching and research. So that's probably the main difference. So, but I think, over the years, I have been lucky to be able to fit and combine this new aspect of the, of the standard, role for an economist. And I have been able to link somehow my research interest in around higher education with the work placement program. So I think that makes, my role and my current position a little bit different from the standard.
Thank you. And Juliette, I guess as a new entrance into this track, how do you explain it to people?
Yeah, so for me, it's a bit, I think I'm still searching a bit in how to explain what I'm doing. I'm still quite junior, having defended my PhD only last year. So that's already something that you're sort of, well, you're searching or you're finding your way into academia. And then, well, I started this new role, which is also new at our faculty. So even within the faculty, they're very much searching into, well, what is really the position of these people, these 12 people that we hired to, well, promote and reward education as also a genuine and a rewarding career track within economics, because that was the intention, I would say. So I tried to focus on that. Explaining that I'm hired to also innovate and develop education. So next to being on the tenure track, I'm also coordinating a profile in our economics bachelor. So it's not just on the course level, but it's also more on a program level, and hopefully also inspiring colleagues, right? So there are many colleagues here at our department that have a more research focused job, and they often also tend to maybe spend more time on research and less time on innovation in econ teaching. And I see it as our task also to inspire them to continue innovation in teaching too.
Excellent. So there's a question for you, which is for somebody in your stage. When did you decide to kind of focus on the education? Was that during your PhD or just what came up when you were finishing?
Yeah, so it was something, it was maybe not a very intentional decision, because when I started to look for a job after my PhD, this opportunity within our faculty came into existence. So they were starting to talk about, well, we should provide junior researchers also with a career track more focused on education. We also want to provide other staff that are not in a tenure track to, well, be able to progress in their career if they want to focus more on education. So it's not just the junior staff. So for me, it was a combination of timing. I finished my PhD, I was looking for a job. I was also applying to more research focused jobs. But this was something that came up, and I saw it as a nice opportunity to,
Right.
Yeah.
Melanie, can I just ask you a quick follow-up question, as I guess the person who's been around the longest since 2014 in this. Do you ever feel like you need to apologize to others?
Yes.
Being on an academic track, or that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's because it's a relatively new approach at most universities to have these to have, you know, not traditional role, but not adjunct, but the secret third thing. I think because it's relatively new, that a lot of people just don't understand it. And there is a lot of questioning about why you would choose that, or an assumption that it was just a default. And yeah, I absolutely sometimes feel like I have to explain what it is I do and why I do it, and justify it in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's quite common. It's the feeling that you have to, in contrast to other people, maybe justify why you've made a conscious choice or not. It just might be an opportunity that came up in an institution or whatever. I'm going to go back to Miguel, and we are conscious that Miguel's microphone isn't as loud as the rest of the women. So you might need to turn your volume up on your computer for him. So as you mentioned, Miguel, you've moved from UEA and Surrey as a senior teaching fellow, and now you're associate professor at National College of Ireland, which so how easy or hard did you find it to sort of explain your experience moving across slightly different roles and institutions and countries?
Yeah, it has been challenging, I think, in both situations. So when I was more in the research type of contract at UEA, I wanted to do teaching. This is something that I always try to do. It doesn't matter what job I was in. But because of my visa restrictions, it was very attached to the type of contract I had. So the HR department told me, oh, sorry, you cannot teach because, you know, of visa restrictions. So when I went to the interview for a teaching fellow position at the University of Surrey, I had to explain a little bit, and, you know, it was a little bit challenging to explain to someone that because of visa restriction, I couldn't teach and so on. So that was a kind of the challenging. And then when I applied to the role that I have now as an assistant professor in economics, I had to, you know, explain, okay, why I didn't have a research agenda that looks like the standard, you know, stream. So those were the main challenges that I face in these two, you know, different type of contracts.
So just to understand, in Ireland, in the National College of Ireland, is there a teaching fellow track, or it was more that there was a management role? That's
Well, the name of the position is the same, but we have some colleagues that focus purely on teaching and managerial role, like program directors. Some other colleagues that have a combination of, the teaching and research side, and myself that I have a combination of, teaching, research on higher education, and also the management aspect of the work placement. So there are different, categories within the same name. We don't make the distinction here about, where it is a teaching focus or not, but in the practicalities, yes, there are different roles.
Okay, thank you. I'd never shut you up, Steffi. Melanie, can I just pick up sort of link to what Miguel's just been talking about, Steffi's question around, and I guess given that you've moved most recently, what you found the most challenging thing to explain in your application about your experience?
Before I comment, before I answer that, I just wanted to call on what Miguel said. The position I was in previously was a very similar role, where my position, the description of it was in a teaching oriented role, but I was also in a more administrative position. And I think that's an aspect of a lot of these teaching positions that's overlooked and that's growing, is that there is a lot of room for growth into more administration roles that I don't think people are aware of. In terms of communicating, to go back to your question, in terms of communicating my strengths for this position here, I don't know if it was terribly challenging, but then again, I've been in a similar role for quite a while. I think the first time that I applied, going from a tenured position to a more teaching oriented position, I think the biggest difficulty I had initially was convincing a hiring committee that this is actually what I wanted to do. I think in a lot of respects, our skills speak for themselves through things like our teaching evaluations and letters of recommendation and things like teaching awards. I think communicating why you are interested in a position like that, for me, was the most challenging. And having been on the other side of that, on a hiring committee as well, it is something that hiring committees look at. Whether, nobody wants to feel like they're only applying for this as like a safety position. They want somebody who is actually dedicated to that role and wants to put their full energy into it.
Thank you. So Juliette, obviously you haven't applied to lots of jobs yet, but it'd be interesting to know a bit of background on the, I guess, Groningen's choice, as far as you know, that to introduce the academic education track, but also how you're trying to work through what's the difference between the research track and the education track, both being classified as academic, which I think is very nice and very rare in many institutions.
Yeah, of course. So I don't really know how this is in other countries, but in the Netherlands for, I think, a couple of years now, there is a discussion, so not just in Groningen, but also at different universities in the Netherlands, about work pressure. There's a very high work pressure in terms of teaching. So there are lots of students coming to the Netherlands, and generally the staff is quite pressured in terms of catering to all these students. And well, sort of alongside that, there is a movement or a discussion about, well, we should have a broader rewarding system, because typically people working at the university, they are rewarded and recognized for their publications. And people see that that's perhaps not really fitting to all different kinds of contracts and researchers and staff that are working at university. So some might be willing to focus more on education or do any other kind of management tasks. And we want to reward those staff as well. So I think that's the context where this academic education tenure track was, came from, that Groningen had the feeling, well, we need to do something with this to provide staff with a career path that might be focused more on education and less on research. So that's, I think, the context where Groningen decided to make this move. And in terms of similarities and differences, so then it would be, I think, a comparison to a normal tenure track, as they say it. So that's also still something which is a bit difficult, right? An academic education track versus a normal tenure track. That's very much has to do with, let's say, the article influence scores of your publications. So for a normal tenure tracker, they need to have a certain number of publications in top journals in economics, versus for us, this criteria is a bit less strict. So the article influence score can be a bit lower, but still you need to publish. And on top of that, this role of sort of innovation and development at the course and program level is something that they want to take into account in your career progression. So these criteria are still quite vague, right? So how are you, but that's the idea.
And in terms of publishing, is it generally in your economics discipline, or is it in economics education, or either?
Either. Yeah, so they're trying to, I would say, to motivate the people in the academic education tenure track to also develop themselves in terms of econ conferences, maybe publications, workshops. But this is something that I think the staff working here at the department, so professors and more senior staff, has very little experience with. So I'm curious to see how they're going to, what they're going to do about that.
Okay, I'm just going to stay on the theme of scholarship because there's quite a bit coming up in the questions. So either Melanie or Miguel, do you feel that you need to get grants to do education research or your placement research, Miguel, anything like that? And how easy is that? And also, how important is that to your role to be publishing like Juliette is? Miguel, do you want to go first, maybe?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it is important to be research active, and this is something that I learned from my previous institution. And although I was not, under the REF or any other of these mechanisms that some countries have in order to make you publish in economic journals, but I think it is important to be research active, and this is how I started, getting more involved with the research on higher education, and also because I was able to make this research more in line with more managerial type of role on work placement, and this is something that I enjoy. So I think that is important. In terms of scholarship, from my experience, I haven't had the pressure, but I can see that if you want to make progress and show that you want to move to a more senior level, at some point, sooner or later, you will have to show that you can get some grants, and this is something that I'm thinking about.
Great, thank you. And Melanie, how about you? Particularly, I guess, moving across to the kind of center role as well, is scholarship and grants quite important for that level?
Well, grants have never been terribly important in any of my research. Everything, and in particular in any teaching oriented research, because it has tended to be very, very localized. I think there's one exception to that with a program I created 15 years ago. I think that was the last grant I actually got that was teaching oriented. Similarly here, our center is funded, is self-sufficient through endowments. So seeking grants through that is not really part of this role. For my previous role, it also was seeking grants wasn't terribly important, but doing research in teaching was. That was definitely an expectation of for promotion. Similar to this role, that role was teaching oriented, but had the opportunity for progression through rank. And in both of these roles, some amount of research is required for progression in roles. Now, it's not the same, similar to what Juliette said, it's not the same requirement in terms of impact factor or the amount, the sheer quantity is not the same, but there is an expectation that you remain active in your field, and whether your field is a more research-oriented field or a teaching-oriented field, you're expected to do a little of both. So, for example, one of my colleagues at my previous institution, he remained active in his field of research, which was economic theory, microtheory. And that would have counted the same, and we were in an identical teaching oriented role. It would have counted the same as if I had a publication in the Journal of Economics and Teaching or any economics related journal.
Excellent.
Sorry?
We've said thank you.
Okay.
So there's a really nice question from Tim, which is one of the things I'm always struggling with. What's innovation and what's not? So how important is it that you're doing excellent teaching? And I guess maybe somebody could comment on how that's actually measured, but also versus really pushing the boundaries, doing pedagogical research, applying things that you've researched in the classroom. Juliette, do you want to have a go at that? I'm conscious you're new.
A difficult question, to be honest. So here at the University of Groningen, we have a lot of student evaluations that quantify, or let's say qualify, how you teach. There's a lot of discussion about that actually too, because it's sometimes a bit of how would you say it, like how much do your students like you, rather than how well did you teach them, which are two different things. So I don't know if that's something that others also recognize, but that definitely counts. On the role of innovation, I have to say that at least how it's specified in our tenure track document, because I looked at it before the meeting today, it really has to do with redesigning courses. So there are a couple of, let's say, courses that you have to take within the university to, as a teaching fellow. All staff has to do that, which is much more about course design, course redesign, and you have to take them. And then the idea of innovation is really to come up with different ways of teaching, or to redesign tutorials, redesign lectures. But I have very little experience with that. I have to be honest about that too.
Thank you. And Miguel, how about you? What's your experience in terms of doing either your management job actually or the teaching job really well versus having to innovate and do something different?
That's challenging because, you know, every time that we want to innovate, that requires time, and obviously it's challenging. I think, you know, what department or schools in my previous jobs and the current job, what they are, you know, looking for is that you make some innovation, you try something, and then see whether that works or not. So not necessarily you need to, you know, apply every possible teaching technique or new teaching innovation. Just try something different. And in terms of assessment, try to take some courses, how to introduce, you know, some assessment flexibility in assessment. Try to, you know, include different students with different background. These sort of things are valuable, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a nice word, valuable. Melanie, I guess sort of picking up on Swati's comment as well about how do you evidence, either in an application or in promotions or anything like that, effective teaching techniques and practices?
I think that's part of the challenge, because teaching evaluations remain the gold standard. And using those to assess true teaching effectiveness, we know is problematic in multiple dimensions. So for me, that has remained the primary way of communicating that. One of the ways you can go beyond that, though, I think that's really effective, is having people sit in on classes, or having colleagues that you can speak to about, developing new assessment techniques, or developing new approaches in the classroom, or using new using new materials in class in a way that somebody can communicate that in a letter of recommendation is really, really valuable. Because I think evaluation committees, at least the ones that I've been on for hiring committees, they are cognizant of the limitations of teaching evaluations, but absent some other instrument, it's really all we have left. So we know it's not great, but it is just what we have right now. And so things like letters of recommendations are the only alternative that really give you any kind of addition to those.
I guess just picking up on that, Nushin had a nice question around, it was for you, Juliette, but I think Miguel as well, if you want to chip in. So the role of peer review teaching in evaluation. And I think the nice point in Nushin's is whether, it's a mix of research and teaching academics doing peer review, rather than just other teaching academics, or potentially even just other research academics who maybe don't know what to value. Juliette, do you know if that's sort of built into your system? Or is there?
Yeah, so I think since 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, might have started during COVID, such a peer review kind of group was started. But it's on, well, if you want to join, you can. You even get some hours for this, so that's really great. And it's not something that is targeted at PhDs or at research or education staff only. So it's a mixture. So if everyone who is interested can join. To be honest, I haven't been to these meetings myself because I was always too late to register, but I think it's really nice that this is organized. It's even between departments, so it's not only economics, it's also business, it's operations, so it's all the different areas of economics that we have here at our faculty of economics and business. So I think it's really nice.
That's really interesting. I've literally been in a meeting yesterday talking about doing something similar at our business school.
Okay.
Miguel, any experience of peer review or the value of it?
I think it can be done with other colleagues. So in order to, see what other people are doing in terms of their teaching, whether they can, take some examples, some insight to apply to their own teaching. Then I also had a kind of peer review, but where people from the higher education department was involved. So I think it was important. And then I also had a kind of, when I had a teaching assistant that were mainly PhD students, so I had to do this kind of myself, and then go to their tutorials, and then kind of meet with them to provide some feedback. So I think these are kind of standard things that many institutions are trying to adopt in order to get some, insight from other colleagues or from, people from other departments that can bring a different view.
Thank you. A couple of minutes ago, Juliette mentioned the magic word hours, and getting hours to join your peer review group. So Peter had a good question about if you're taking on leadership roles or admin roles or service roles, whatever you call them in your institution, does that hold you back from doing your research or even having the time to innovate in your teaching at all? Melanie, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, most definitely. my role at Virginia Tech as Director of Undergraduate Studies had a very similar administrative role as when I was chair of a department in a small liberal arts college. It easily consumed a third of my time. And so that did limit the attention I could give to research. Luckily, I don't know if luckily is the right word, but in that role, there was also a little bit of fungibility between heavy service commitment and research commitment. So that didn't act as a penalty. And in my role now, it's very similar, that there's a degree of fungibility between research and heavy service commitments. But it most certainly took up a substantial portion of time.
And Miguel, I might dig a bit deeper on this one with you from many of your experiences. So quite a lot of us end up doing what might be called small scale admin roles without actually getting workload credit for them. So you're doing them on top of the day job. Have you any experience of that, or do you feel like when you've had management roles or service roles, they've been given the appropriate amount of hours in your workload, you know, or teaching reduction that's suitable to match them?
That's very challenging. So to be honest, especially at the beginning, when you are starting with these kind of roles that are more, managerial or admin role, it requires a lot of time, because you need to understand, when we do our PhDs, we are not trained, to go through these kind of roles. So for example, in my case, when I landed into the role of, looking after the work placement program, I had no idea. So the first question is, what is work placement? What is that about? So I started from, from scratch, basically. It took me a few years to get into that kind of role. So obviously I had to reduce my time for research, and then I started to pick that up a little bit more. And what I always found difficult, and I still find difficult, is because of these kind of roles usually involve relation with people from other departments, or from people that don't do research, and it's hard to explain what you do, and sometimes I find it difficult to convince that, well, this is not my main role, this is part of my other roles. So that's very challenging, I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on the sort of teaching service balance in their workload, whether there's any issues with that, any different to anyone else? I suppose I could talk for hours about it, but I won't. I think Asali, I'm really conscious of your question, and it's one of the reasons why I'm running the Menti. So what I'm going to do just for a moment is see what our Menti results are looking like. Hopefully some people have had time to fill them in. So Asali, I have the question about, there's a very clear job market for others. Why don't we have something like that? Why are we treated differently? So if I go backwards. So one question was, if you were thinking about moving to a new institution, where would you go and look? And most people are talking about going to, I guess, the standard websites, so Joe or jobs.ac.uk, but also maybe a bit more of asking people about opportunities in institutions, using your contacts. And I think really important point made here about wouldn't know how to look for it overseas. So whether in other countries they use the same websites in the same areas. I think the other thing is that the timing of when they're posted could be quite different. So you might have to keep your jobs.ac.uk notifications going all year round, rather than a particular point in the year. In terms of whether you think other institutions would value your job profile, most people who answered said yes. I had an option 3, which was a blank option. Yeah, and I think so people are trying to specialize their skills, their approaches, so that they're, I guess, transferable, and looking for people who care about what you do. So I think maybe there's a signal that if you were moving position, you'd have to look a bit more carefully about whether they're looking for what you have to offer. Whereas I guess if you're, I don't know, a macro assistant economist, professor, you might know what a macro people are looking for in another department isn't going to be that different to what you're doing. So I'll keep this open. But yeah, and I think, you know, quite a few people here are experienced at being program directors. We have heads of departments or ex-heads of department. So I guess once you get to that level, you might be selling your leadership and managerial roles a bit more, rather than just your classroom teaching. But I think I'm not going to make Parama talk about what the Royal Economic Society is doing, because she's but I think this issue of should there be a job market or some sort of equivalent space for education focused jobs is a live one, but is a tricky one, not only for everyone working on it in academia, but also, you know, HR departments. Sometimes the computer just says no about these things, and there's other processes to think about, but it's certainly something that we at CTaLE are thinking about. Also the other question about, you know, how do you define excellent education and excellent contribution to education? So going back to the student evaluation bias, that's also something that we're talking about, and any volunteers who want to work on that with us, we'd really appreciate that. So with all that in mind, I'm going to ask our panelists, I guess, how they found their job. So, you know, was it through contacts or through searching? And also, you know, what the main thing is that they feel their institution is looking for from people applying. And I guess Juliette maybe at entry level, Miguel, you can talk about your level, and Melanie maybe more senior, just to make it up. So Juliette, you know, you've kind of already signaled you were doing the PhD, so we might know how you got your job, but you can explain it, but also what the most important things are for your institution if you were hiring somebody in at your level.
Yeah, so I think me being hired together with 11 other colleagues, we are a bit of a test case, to be honest, right? So they're really seeing if this experiment is going to work, and they're really also working a bit like, well, what can we expect of them? How should we shape the career path and their function? So that also means that this vacancy that I applied to was an internal vacancy. So this really is a contact, networking thing. We were lucky to have a job already here, or maybe someone that you would know who could say, well, maybe apply to this job. However, today as well, I was browsing a bit, and I saw that also different faculties, so not just economics, but also other faculties of the University of Groningen, start to offer these kind of tenure track or education focused tenure tracks. And there typically it's really focused on that you should be able to demonstrate, well, you should hold a PhD, but definitely also an interest in education, as well as the motivation to contribute to innovative course and program design. And this is not something that you should have been able to do already during your PhD or previous job, but you should demonstrate some kind of motivation and well, maybe inspiration to do so. So that's my...
If somebody was looking for one of these roles at Groningen, where would it be advertised?
So that's a very good question. So this is something that I actually found just on the RUG website. Maybe I can check if this is something that you find on Dutch career websites, like academia websites, where job postings are posted.
That would be great to know. But I think, yeah, some places I think just do their institutional, and some do use the posts. Miguel, how about you? How did you go about looking for a new role when you moved country?
So in my case, they were looking for someone with the teaching experience that shows some innovations in the teaching, also being research active, not necessarily in economics or publishing in mainstream economic journals, and also to show some evidence of innovations or collaboration at program level. So in my case, I was involved with the work placement program, but I also coordinated a research method, which usually involves a little bit of collaboration with colleagues in departments, allocating supervisors, and deal with the assessment. So that helped me with that part of the role.
And how did you find the job? Was it advertised on an academic website?
It was advertised at the National College of Ireland website, and also I noticed that here in Ireland, at least LinkedIn is quite popular. So that's another source that you may want to check.
Actually, that's quite, so we've just recently advertised an entry-level teaching fellow at Imperial, and LinkedIn seems to be the place where a lot of people are applying through at the moment. So for those of you not a lot on LinkedIn, that if you're considering moving, that might be interesting. And Melanie, how about you? How did you find your new role?
I applied for a role here through the JOE. The job openings for economists from the AEA, and the same with my previous role as well. In the past, though, I think contacts and networking has been incredibly important, because so many institutions for these teaching roles do not post them on the more well-known sites. And even if they do, it's not always people sometimes can be recruited. Let me put it that way. There is a degree of headhunting that goes on for some of these roles that even if they are advertised nationally, reaching out to people and having them apply is really, really an underlooked part. That said, I've also seen and applied for roles through the Chronicle, the Chronicle's website,
Yeah.
and higher ed jobs. Those tend to be where most of these occur. But it is true, some of these institutions, they only list them in their public, like their outward facing job postings. And that's when having a really strong network is advantageous.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm going to keep you on mute for, so Pram had a question about how common tenure track teaching track jobs are in the US. I guess they're becoming increasingly common in the UK. Juliette's obviously mentioned it's becoming more common in the Netherlands. In the US, is it? Yeah,
I don't have any firm evidence of that. I think anecdotally, I think that's the case. The interesting thing about them is that they vary as much as institutions vary as well. You see everything from an expansion of lecturer roles to creating a second track beyond that. So for example, at Virginia Tech, they had a lecturer track which you could progress through and get promotion through. And then they had a collegiate track, which was not tenured, but as you progress through rank, you had different lengths of your contract, up to 7 years for full. Here, we're still on annual contracts, but you have progression through rank, but we also have a clinical track and an instructor track, which are different with different requirements. And I think my sense is that departments and universities are still trying to figure this route out, that like Juliette said, it's somewhat of an experiment, and I don't know where it's going yet, but it does not seem like it's going away. It seems like that is becoming more of the norm, that you have these specialist positions that really just focus on teaching.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting. So I think, you know, that clinical term, because in medicine you see quite a lot of this, of people, you know, working in hospitals who they want their only role in a higher education institution to be teaching. But I think, so it's not just an economics issue, obviously. But yeah, I think, you know, it all lends itself to the sort of, if you're job hunting, Googling teaching fellow won't get you very far in most countries outside the UK, or teaching track. So knowing what you're looking for and what's it called, and as Melanie's emphasized, every institution, and possibly even within an institution might call it different things or have different meanings for it. Which kind of brings us back to the sort of, how do you prove that you're a good educator? And Peter had a nice question around, so in the UK, we have something called the Higher Education Authority Fellowships, now Advanced HE. And Miguel, I was just wondering, is that something that's recognized in Ireland? In your experience, that the HA fellowships is something required or appreciated?
It's not required, but it is a plus, definitely. So in this kind of position, it will help a lot. In particular because of the similarities between, Ireland and the UK. So regarding to that question, I would suggest to, look for the National Higher Education Authority in the country and try to find some online teaching courses. For example, here in Ireland, I found out that there is kind of a good place that is called the National Teaching Forum. So there is a lot of discussion there, people across different universities that are involved from the higher education sector. And I did a couple of online courses, and that was kind of a plus for me. Yeah.
Excellent. And Juliette, how about in the Netherlands? Is there sort of a professional certification for education or anything similar?
Not really. So we have these, let's say, within university courses that you need to take and fulfill at some point in your career, which is called a university teaching qualification and a senior university teaching qualification. But that's very much within the institution. So it might be different between universities in the Netherlands, and I'm not really sure if it's coordinated. I only know that this term at least is recognized.
Excellent. And Melanie, any kind of certification in the US?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that's more at the institutional level. Some PhD programs have instituted their own teaching certificate. I know we did at Virginia Tech. Some places are requiring some of their PhD students to take some sort of evidence that, or take some sort of course that shows that they've got some exposure to pedagogy. But that it's really all over the place right now. There's no formal national system.
Okay, I can see Christian sitting there. So Christian runs the education training for the Economics Network. So Christian, there may be demand across the world for more education training and, standardized certificates and stuff, because you have all that spare time that you can do that in. Ramin, I'm losing track of the chat. Is there anything I've missed? No? Okay. So I had a wrap-up question, and I'm going to try and find it now. Yeah, so Melanie, I might start with you. What's your 30-second, 1-minute advice to someone who's thinking about moving, about how they should develop their resume or their CV? And again, maybe at your level.
So at my level, which is really like mid-career for a teaching track position, is really to start thinking about how how you want the remainder of your career to go and start focusing on building skills for that and showing evidence of that on your vita. So if you want to move into more administrative roles, seeking out more opportunities that show that you've got the capacity to develop those skills at the very least. So for example, taking on more leadership of committees, being on more search committees, those are kind of entry ways to start showing that on your vita.
And do you feel that people are given the opportunity to do that?
Oh, definitely. I think a universal in departments is not finding enough people willing to serve on committees. And so that's definitely an in, that if you're willing to take a leadership role in that, I think you're going to find a department chair who will accommodate that.
Thank you. Juliette, I guess maybe you looking forward, what kind of things do you think you should be doing to get to the next stage?
So I've been thinking a bit about this. So one thing that I was, that I would like to do, and maybe also advise people that are in similar stages of their early careers. I don't know if there are any at this meeting today, but one thing that I particularly think is very valuable is to build a network. So not just a network of researchers, but also like-minded people interested in education, because you can share your ideas there. And if people know that you're interested in education-focused jobs, they might also remember you at some point if there is a vacancy or an opportunity. That said, I also think that taking new opportunities, even if it's sometimes not really clear where you're going to, so an academic education track or maybe some kind of job that is not necessarily clear what it might go to, can be very valuable, because it gives you freedom to maybe shape your job in a way that fits you. So that's one thing that I would advise, and also to take opportunities to propose novel things, right? Sometimes in a department, I don't know if that's similar in other universities, people are focused on research, might be a bit sleepy in terms of teaching innovation and having to redesign a course another time. And then if you propose something and you can make people enthusiastic to, join you, that can create really nice things. So that's something, at least for me, that I would like to continue to strive for in the future, and to add to EconTEAching.
Very wise words. Thank you. Miguel, last word on what you think people should do to develop their resume to advance.
Well, I agree with my colleagues, and on top of that, probably I would advise to start thinking about connections with higher education departments. Try to improve that aspect that we usually don't have when we get the PhD in economics, and try to look for some courses online through the Higher Education Academy or through the university that can complement this side. And also try to, as Juliette mentioned, try to be open, and show that you are willing to take some, managerial roles, like at program level, or try to improve some part of the administrative process of programs. That is what I would suggest.
Thank you. Conscious of time, I just want to say thanks so much to Melanie and Juliette and Miguel. An excellent discussion. I think my advice is do what you love, and do it with good people where you can. But I think that, the community thing is really important, and hopefully we will see you again at more CTaLE events. But as anybody's interested in working in any of these areas, do get in touch with us on the CTaLE Gmail, and we're looking to do a bit more of connecting people on these kind of research areas, because they're really important to all of us, I think, and putting our heads together is probably the best way forward. So have a nice afternoon or morning wherever you are, and see you very soon.